All right. So this presentation, we're calling it the making and unmaking of the Negro. So this is a treatise on anecdotal world history and law. Um, the history and law is not often taught together, but we have to tie some legal things to historical events in order to get full clarity on the basis for those historical events. So these are going to give us evidence that prove that the transatlantic slavery was an outgrowth of Spain defeating the Moorish Empire in 1491. The Negro is a legal status which was manufactured to strip people of Moorish descent of their nationality. The loss of nationality was key to branding them as subhuman in the eyes of the law and therefore able to enslave them. Um, and identifying as Black or African American still has a legal disability attached to that legal definition, which we can't say that this is why Black lives don't matter, but you can't say that it's not. And it's simply defining us as not being a people. And we know that the law attaches to people. And so this is going to get into it because essentially what we have today, the definition of Black and African American is the same definition, in essence, the same essence behind it that it had back during the time of slavery, the Negro had during the time of slavery. All right. So, but to reverse this process, to reverse this issue, um, we need to simply return to the nationality of our forefathers. Um, and we're Moorish Americans, and we're going to give you the history to show you why you may be Moorish American. One of the primary indicators that you may be Moorish American is that your people were enslaved during the time of slavery, brought to America, or were here already and brought in and put in slavery, and consider yourself a Black or African American. But before I go into that, I just want to reiterate something I read earlier from the Divine Warning from Noble Drew Ali. The word Negro deludes in Latin to the language, deludes in the Latin language to the word nigger, the same as the word color deludes to anything that is painted, varnished, or dyed. Every nation must bear a national descent name of their forefathers, because honoring thy fathers and thy mothers, your days will be lengthened upon this earth. These names have never been recognized by any true American citizen this day. Through your free national name, you are known and recognized by all nations of the earth that are recognized by said national government in which they live. So this is very important because what we're seeing here is starting to show that these words ring true. All right. All right. And so in talking about Noble Drew Ali, we're talking about the historical information that he presented to those of Asiatic or Afro-Asiatic descent here in America. Those who call themselves Black African American. All right. He compiled a Moorish Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. And the Moorish Holy Quran, chapter 47, is a historical lesson that is to be strictly preserved. And it's essentially the basis by which we claim Moorish descent. Okay. It covers our origin prior to Africa, the Moorish Quran does, and it covers our migrations and the kingdoms that we founded, at least some of them. And so he particularly honed in on us being of Moorish descent. And this history lesson, as we began to do actual research, we began to find governmental and primary sources that actually validate the information in the lesson. So we're going to show as a backdrop, chapter 47 and what it states. And then we're going to pull up some governmental and documentation and historical documentation that actually begins to say that, yeah, that's correct. So Sister Grayo, before I proceed, you've been quiet. Anything, questions or comments or anything that you think that we should go into?
No, actually, I'm fine. I'm following along with you. That form 181, that always makes me be kind of quiet because it just says to me, as an academic, we think we know things until we realize we don't.
Right. All right, brother Lloyd. How we looking on your end?
Oh, everything's looking good. You're doing a great job explaining. Brother in, I think, DC just asked how he can link up with us. Hopefully he saw I posted the link for the website. But could you just give some advice for people in general who are just wondering, how they can link up with the Moorish Science Temple of America, Islam?
Sure. If everyone can see my screen, you can go to mstofa.net right there. And you can link up with us by clicking on this link here. It'll have a link to the registration form and with detailed instructions. If you want to find out more, everyone, especially if you want to get study notes from this presentation, join our mailing list. As you can see, we have a blog, the Moorish Guide blog, and we have news of our events on our site. So events and the Moorish Guide are actually on our site. So when you subscribe here, you'll get updated on all events and in all blog posts. So definitely please visit the site. You can click to join. Read through the site and reach out to one of our locations. All right.
Now, I strongly encourage people to go to our site, take a look at it. What you may be, anybody who's seeing this, and I do hope that everybody who's watching it then shares it with other people. If they go to our site, they'll see that the Moorish Science Temple of America might not be what they thought it was. Because a lot of people, there's a lot of things out there. And as you know, Supreme Grand Sheik, I'm all about being who we are every day. And I think that our site really illustrates who we are every day. There are things about history. There's things about science. Sometimes there's COVID updates. So I really think that with everything that goes on, anybody who is anybody, if they think they're anybody, should be going to visit our site, checking us out, seeing what it's all about.
All right, great. All right. So since I've been talking so much, sis, can you read this aspect of chapter 47 right here on the left?
Now, let me see. On the left, from the top. Oh, from the top. Okay. Egypt, the capital empire of the Dominion of Africa. The inhabitants of Africa are the descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. Old man Cush and his family are the first inhabitants of Africa who came from the land of Canaan. The dominion of Cush, northeast and southeast Africa, and northwest and southwest was his father's dominion of Africa. In later years, many of their brethren from Asia and the Holy Lands joined them. The Moabites from the land of Moab, who received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit northwest Africa, they were the founders and are the true possessors of the present Moroccan Empire. With their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren, who sojourn from the land of Canaan seeking new homes. Their dominion and inhabitation extended from northeast and southwest Africa across Great Atlantis, even unto the present North, South, and Central America, and also Mexico and the Atlantis Islands, before the great earthquake, which caused the great Atlantic Ocean. According to all true and divine records of the human race, there is no Negro, Black, or colored race attached to the human family, because all the inhabitants of Africa were and are the human race, descendants of the ancient Canaanite nation from the holy land of Canaan. What your ancient forefathers were, you are today, without a doubt or contradiction.
All right.
I know if you want me to go further.
No, that's it right there.
Okay.
So this is a historical lesson here that's being told. Okay. So here, this particular chapter is speaking about a time period in which the continents were connected, where there was no Atlantic Ocean. Okay. And so what this is mentioning is that the inhabitants of Africa are descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. And the work that Sister Dana Reynolds Marnichi has done begins to show where Canaan was, which was in southern Arabia, in Yemen, and slightly north of that. So it's beginning to kind of give us some understanding of what Prophet Noble Drew Ali is saying in these lessons. When you do further research, you find that West African peoples actually have a tradition of coming from the East, particularly in a lot of cases, the Yemen, meaning they didn't necessarily originate in West Africa. They originated over in what we would call Arabia. We can still see here that Arabia is on the continental plate of Africa. So, it's unfortunate we ran over time. Sister Marniche couldn't attend because it really, her research really kind of crystallizes and it makes it clear that, the original inhabitants of Arabia, were what we would call Black people. And so we see that, just by proximity, it's only 20 miles from from Ethiopia, to the coasts of Arabia. And so, in combination with the fact that they say, yeah, we came from the East and migrated into Africa. So this is, she's compiling and has compiled a book, a peer-reviewed book, that actually validates the fact that, there's several and large. And I can't speak to whether it's majority or not. I was actually expecting her to come and speak to that. But a large portion of West Africans that say, yeah, we came from the East. All right. So it's mentioned in here that Cush and Ham, came into Africa, right? And were the first inhabitants of Africa. And they did so prior to the earthquake. And so Ham's dominion was north, west, and southwest Africa. And Cush's dominion was northeast and southeast. All right. So it's interesting here that, as we look at this from a standpoint of, we always talk about Native Americans, but we haven't really heard the story or the theory that the first peoples of the Americas came from Africa by way of a land bridge or by way of the currents that exist. But this is telling us that this is in fact how it happened. All right. And so let's get into a little bit of information about this. All right. So here again, the Bantu peoples of Africa are those groups known as sub-Saharan Africans, right? However, the history of several Bantu groups, in their history, they claim they migrated from the Nile Valley, all right, of Egypt. All right. And so these groups here all claim that they migrated south from their origin in Egypt. All right. And some even claim that they came prior to Egypt, came from the east. All right. So here's a list of them. And when you subscribe, you get a copy of the notes for this presentation. All right. And so now, in talking about this aspect where it says the Moabites from the land of Moab received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit Northwest Africa. They were the founders and are the true possessors of the present Moroccan Empire, with their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren who sojourned from the land of Canaan seeking new homes. Their dominion and inhabitation extended from northeast and southwest Africa, across the great Atlantis, even into the present North, South, and Central America, and also Mexico, before the earthquake which caused the Atlantic Ocean. So it's saying that the Moabites are the Moroccans. All right. And that we're descendants of those peoples because we inhabited Northwest Africa on grant of the pharaohs of Egypt. And at that time, since there was no Atlantic Ocean, Northwest Africa included North, South, Central America. All right. So let's see if we can find any evidence of that. All right. We know that the Moorish Empire, or you may or may not know, but Moors were Africans are popularized or well known in history because they were Africans who ruled the Iberian Peninsula, or otherwise known as Spain, from the year 711 to approximately 1491. That's way back. Okay. And in 1491, we were defeated in Spain, right, by the Spaniards. And in 1492, just 1 year later, Columbus sails the ocean blue to the Americas. Now, we all understand and know that at that time period, or prior to that time period, Europeans thought that the world was flat. But just 1 year after the defeat of Granada, the last Moorish stronghold in Spain, that defeat happened in 1491. And then 1 year later, Columbus now sails to discover the Americas. Now, our context here is that we were over in the Americas before the earthquake. All right. And so now here we see that when we were defeated, Columbus sailed the ocean blue 1 year later and found the Americas with people in it. All right. We're going to get to the root of why they said that they discovered America. All right. It's a legal concept as to what they're considering discovery. And this is actually explained by the US Supreme Court in the case Johnson versus McIntosh. All right, but let's look at this book here. This is, like I said, it's got a lot more information than the typical PowerPoint, but that's because we're going to give you these slides so you can have them. All right, so I'm going to just hit them from a high note. But in particular, this Chronicle of Alfonso the Emperor is a governmental document from Spain. It's one of three very important chronicles in Spanish history. So this is considered a governmental document and an official chronology of that nation's history. All right. And it is accounting firsthand of events from 1126 to 1157. So that's way back. We're in 2020. This is 1126 to 1157. Now we can see this is the Moorish period of rule because Moors were ruling Spain from the period of 711 to 1491. So this is right smack in the middle of that. All right. So it mentions here, it's talking about Princess Sancha of Toledo, Spain, and she was addressing the Almoravid king Ali. All right. And it says that the scene evokes sentiments of Romance Morisco and the nobility shown by the Moor and the Christian alike. Okay. Now this whole chronicle is in Latin. Okay. But this particular translation, he highlights some aspects of it and talks about it. But here he actually gives, the translator of this book, Glenn Edward Lipsky, he actually gives the actual Latin text as what was being spoken about in this scene. And when you simply translate that to, from Google Translate from Latin to English, right? It's talking about CNS. He sent messengers to the king of the Moabites. And essentially, this is the Empress Sancha saying that this Almoravid king was the king of the Moabites. All right. So this is something that we have to begin to understand as we study our history. A lot of our history is in Spanish, Latin, Arabic, Greek, right? German even, right? And so they're speaking about us in terms of the ancient names, right? But here he mentioned that these are Moors and Christians in this scene, Sancha and Almoravid King Ali. The term Almoravid is the Arabic name, but in Latin, that same name is Moabitarum. So that's Moabite. And here the author says that, those are the Moors, those Moabites, those are the Moors. And the Almoravid King Ali is the king of these Moabites. So that's why we show this particular slide. So this is an eyewitness saying that what they called these people were Moabitarum. The Christians called them Moabitarum. Okay. So the commentator, he's translating Moabitarum to Moor in English, and the literal translation is Moabite from Latin to English. All right. And here we have the commentator. He also mentions the Arabic name for these Moors, which is Almoravid. So this is a dynasty, one of the dynasties of Moorish Spain. So now in our minds, we can think Moor and Moabite are synonymous. If you're talking about a Moabite, you're talking about a Moor. And if you're talking about Almoravid, you're talking about a Moor. So now when you study in your history, and you're doing your research, when you see these names, your ears should perk up because you understand that these are some of your people. All right. And so now the term Moabite was used during the Almoravid period. All right. Now here we go. Same book. And it's speaking about the fact that Spain was under Moorish rule. And during that time, it was called Andalusia. All right. The original translation of this text proves that the Spaniards called the Moors by the term Moabitarum or Moabite, just as mentioned in the lessons here. So by tracing ourselves back, we can now see what we were doing and what were the accomplishments, right? So when you begin to look into our accomplishments in Spain, we brought in, medicine, science, renovated, the civilization, brought in the period of the Convivencia, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in harmony, where each one was able to govern themselves according to their respective religious law. But the government as a standpoint was administrated by the Moors. Okay. So this is a period here where we're finding out what they called our forefathers, what we were called. All right. And here is mentioning that in this Latin text, right? This Latin text here is from that particular book. And it's saying that in the days of the harvest, he set all the corn on the whence, and all the olive trees and the vineyards had to be cut down, all the fonia. And the fear of them fell upon all the inhabitants of the land of the Moabites and the Hagarenes. So from our studies, we know that the Hagarenes are descendants of Hagar, meaning the Turks. Okay. And so it mentioned in here that the king weighed heavily on all those who lived in the lands of the Saracens. And there's a footnote. All right. This footnote mentions that Almoravids or Moabitus, and the Spanish Muslims, the Agarini, were called Saracens. So that's important for us to understand that at this period, the Spanish called the Moabites and the Agarenes Saracens. Okay, so that was a term that covered them both. This is very important with now understanding the slave trade, because the slave trade was specifically targeted for Saracens. Okay, now, any questions so far? Brother Lloyd, any questions in the chat or anything that I need to address? And am I good on how much time do I have?
No questions. You're good.
Okay, I think I got about 30 more minutes. Okay, so here we are in this particular time period. You have Pope Nicholas V, who on June 8th, 1452, issued a papal bull or a papal decree. It was entitled Dum Diversus. All right, it means until different. All right, and it authorized the Portuguese to conquer the Saracens and pagans and consign them to perpetual servitude. Now, most people would tell you that Saracen was a term that was relegated for Muslims, right? Just for Muslims. But specifically, we just saw that term Saracen was targeted at the Moabites and the Spanish Muslims, the Agarini, you see? So this term is an inclusive term for them specifically and others generally. All right. So here it is. This papal bull in its text here says that we grant you by these present documents, and this is the Pope speaking to the kings of Portugal. We grant you by these present documents with full permission to invade, search out, capture, and subjugate the Saracens and pagans and any other unbelievers of Christ, wherever they may be, as well as their kingdoms, their duchies, principalities, and other property, and reduce their persons to perpetual servitude. Okay, so when you look at it, what Muslims were put into slavery? No other Islamic Muslims were put into slavery. This particular papal bull issued in 1452 was specifically directed at Saracens, meaning those Moabites and those Agarenes. All right. So you already saw the conflict was specifically with the Moabites. And here it is, they're being put the decree is being put out for them to be put in perpetual servitude. Okay. Now, 1493, this is 2 years after the fall of Moorish Spain, right? Alexander the Sixth, Pope Alexander the Sixth, he issued a papal bull or a papal decree called Inter Caetera, and that basically established that when one Christian nation finds a land, all the other Christian nations have to go through them if they want to get to it. If they want to buy it, they got to go through them. Once it's found by discovery under this papal bull, then they own it. And if you want a piece of it, you got to buy from that finding Christian country. In this case, it was Spain who found the Americas, and as a result, everything in pink was allotted to Spain by virtue of Christopher Columbus finding the Americas. But that upset the Portuguese, because the Portuguese wanted a piece of the Americas as well. So what they ended up coming to is a Treaty of Tordesillas. And so you see this line here in purple. Originally, when Christopher Columbus found the Americas, the line that delineated Portugal's territory from Spain's territory in the New World was this line, which only gave them a little tip of Brazil. So Portuguese only had this little tip of Brazil, but Spain had everything else in the Americas. Okay. Well, the Portuguese ended up negotiating with them and with Spain and the Pope, and they came to the Treaty of Tordesillas. Okay. And as a matter of fact, I was in Spain on June 7th of last year, and they still celebrate this treaty being struck up in the place called Tordesillas. So it's interesting that, the carving up of other people's lands is still being celebrated. So here we see the interesting thing is that the Portuguese were the first ones to establish and start the slave trade in West Africa. And the part of the New World, which they were given under these treaties with the Pope in Spain, is what we call Brazil now. And Brazil is the largest, has the largest populations of Africans outside of Africa. And that's because the Portuguese began the slave trade in West Africa and were transporting a majority of their slaves to South America via Brazil. Okay, so together, these papal decrees are actually the legal basis for the doctrine of discovery and the transatlantic slave trade. There's more papal bulls where they essentially say the same thing, that Saracens are to be reduced, which Saracens or Moors are to be reduced to perpetual servitude. That means slavery forever. Okay. And so it's important for us to understand that from a historical standpoint. We don't have any problem. We're not saying anything about the church. These are just facts that we're pulling out in the historical record. And if you read the case Johnson versus McIntosh, which is a US Supreme Court case, they establish and actually solidify and recognize that this was a legitimate means of acquiring title to the Americas. That when Christopher Columbus found the land, that the Pope had the right to grant Spain the title to the land. Okay. And it wasn't because there was no people there. They said that because there was no Christians there. So here we see again the concept of they felt as if the natives did not have full capacity as people. As people, the natives did not have the capacity to hold the ultimate title to that land because they weren't Christians. All right. So with that being the case, that's why Columbus discovered America, because there were people there that couldn't be seen in the eyes of their law. There were people there who they did not consider a people. And that is the basis for the United States claim of land in this country. Okay. And any other subsequent countries who would have obtained land in the United States, they had to go and get it through Spain ultimately. See, the British, the French, right? They all had to get it through Spain. All right. Any questions on that? Okay. And so here we see the discovery of America. Here's a book which saying the discovery of America is an outgrowth of the conquest of the Moors by the Spaniards. So here again, older books, such as this one, which I recommend that you get a copy of it. Older books such as this one, which were published during times when African Americans were in slavery and forbidden to read, where they spoke openly about who we were and openly about how they came to come in possession of these particular lands. Okay. Now, here we have a document from the Ohio Archaeological and Historical Society, and it is explaining the reason or the chain of title that Ohio traces their claim to the land back to. Okay. And they trace their chain of title back to Spain. All right. And the Ohio Archaeological and Historical Society, I'm from Ohio, is a governmental agency in Ohio. All right. So this is a governmental record. And they're talking about the right of discovery, the doctrine of discovery. And here's a letter from Dr. Pedro de Santander that they cite, talking about as they trace their title to this land back to Spain, to the Spaniards. Right. And they said it's a letter from Pedro de Santander to the King of Spain on July 15, 1557. And so he's saying about Florida that this is the land of promise possessed by idolaters, the Amorite, Amalekite, Moabite, and Canaanite. And this land is possessed by the Eternal Father. This is the land promised by the Eternal Father to the faithful, since we are commanded by God and the Holy Scriptures to take it from them, being idolaters, and by reason of their idolatry and sin, to put them all to the knife, leaving no living things save maidens and children, but their cities robbed and sacked, their walls and houses leveled to the earth. So then it says, and so this is a quote from that particular letter. Okay. And then goes on to say, this was saying in effect that the heathen had no rights whatever that Christians were bound to respect. So anyone who's astute with the, Brother Theo, are you familiar with the Dred Scott case?
He had to drop off.
Okay.
We appreciate that, brother. Thank him for coming on, but he had to drop off.
Okay, cool. So the Dred Scott case, they mentioned the exact same quote. It was saying in effect that the Negro had no rights whatever that white men were bound to respect. So here is mentioning that when in 1557, when the Spaniards came to Florida, the land of Florida, the land was already in possession of the Amorite, Amalekite, Moabite, and Canaanite. All right. So we have this lesson here, and this is mentioning here that that the European ideas of that age, not only were the heathen nations of other quarters of the globe lawful spoil of their civilized conquerors, but as between the Christians themselves, the sovereign pontiff was the supreme arbiter. So the sovereign pontiff is the Pope. So he would be the judge between the different Christian nations that would find different territories in the world, and he would determine who had the right claim and who had the title. Okay. But we can see here that they were attempting to extinguish the title of the people called Amorite, Amalekite, Moabite, and Canaanite. All right. And at that time, you see here, this particular book from Ohio is quoting Francis Parkman. See down here? The footnote is Parkman, Pioneers of France in the New World. So why in the heck would Ohio be talking about Florida? These Spaniards were talking about they were in Florida. Why is Ohio talking about Florida? Well, when you go back to the source that Ohio was citing for that letter, this is actually where they got it from. Okay. And it's mentioning here on page 18, down here at the bottom. I won't go and read the rest of that letter, but right here, it says not a Spaniard had yet gained a foothold in Florida on page 18. On page 19, that name, talking about Florida, as the Spaniards of that day understood it, comprehended the whole country, extended from the Atlantic on the east to the longitude of New Mexico on the west, and from the Gulf of Mexico and the River of Psalms indefinitely northward to the Polar Sea. This vast territory was claimed by Spain in the right of discoveries of Columbus, the grant of the Pope, and the various expeditions mentioned above. So these Moabites, Amorites, Amalekites, and Canaanites were in possession of a land they called Florida. And at that period, when the Spaniards first got here, the Atlantic on the East Coast, all the way over to New Mexico out west, and from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Polar Sea, all of that was Florida, right? So that's why Ohio was talking about Florida as they traced their land title back to Spain. All right. And so here is another publication. I believe this is Men's Quarterly publication from the 1800s. And it's speaking about the descendants of the Moabites. Excuse me. It's talking about the Moors and the fact that they were granted permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle west of Egypt, and that they were so powerful, this conglomeration of Amorites, and Mauritanians is where the term Moor comes from, and that they were so powerful that they were able to demand tribute from the pharaohs of Egypt, and they were granted permission to settle west of Egypt by the pharaohs. Okay, so you'll be able to take a look at that in the notes when you subscribe. Right. So, and we talk, historically, when we talk about how we identify, when you go back a certain time period, you begin to see that the books of older times, they spoke about us plainly and called us Moors, right? And as you come to to newer books, like for instance, this is the Odyssey. All right, this one was translated in 1996. All right, Homer's Odyssey. But there's another one. Goes. Sorry about that. There's another one by Thomas Hobbes. There we go. Which was translated in 1675. So both of them are the Odyssey, but one was translated in 1996. Another one was translated in 1675. Okay, so we see the time periods. All right. So the 1675 version by Thomas Hobbes is talking about Neptune, how the Greek god Neptune was in Blackmoor land, and that the Blackmoors are the utmost of humanity. And as far as east and west, they lived as far as east and west, but they were asunder, meaning they were split in two. It says that their borders were disjoined. The Blackmoors' borders were disjoined, but they had invited this Greek god Neptune to feast on ram and bull. So it's mentioned that their borders were disjoined because one part of them lived in the east and another part of them lived in the west. Okay, so now that's the 1675 translation. Now let's look at the Let's look at the 1996 translation. Same translation or same book, but as you look at this one being translated, here we go. Same verse says that Poseidon had gone to visit the Ethiopians worlds away. So where they first mentioned Blackmoors in the older translation, they translated it now to Ethiopians living off at the farthest of mankind. All right. And that the Ethiopians are people split in two. One part where the sun god sets, and another part live where the sun god rises. All right. And so it mentions also that, Poseidon, which Poseidon and Neptune are equivalent. Um, just different name, but it's same, talking about the same Greek god, right? So we can see as we go back in history, there's a historical connection. There's a historical basis that our people who are called by various names now were called Moorish. So as we begin to look at this from an identity standpoint, we have to understand, that we can make this connection and it be sound. All right, let's see here. So now I'll go on down here to, let's look at the Negro law. So where did the term Negro and Black come from? As you look at this, the Negro law of South Carolina, it mentions here that is defining the status of the Negro, his rights and his disabilities. Okay, so this is actually the term Negro is defined here legally, the same way it's defined now, all right, way Black and African American are defined now. And so Section 4, the term Negro is defined to slave Africans, meaning those who have been enslaved. And it says the ancient Berbers and their descendants. So these slave Africans, all right, have been basically, they're explaining who they had enslaved. This is the ancient Berbers and their descendants. And that it does not embrace the free inhabitants of Africa, such as the Egyptians, Moors, or the Negro Asiatics, such as the Lascars. So here it is mentioning the fact that the ancient Berbers were the ones who were enslaved. Okay. But it doesn't embrace the free inhabitants, meaning the people they did not catch, the people who were free, right? Such as the Egyptian, Moors, or the Negro Asiatics. So here again, we see the term Asiatic being in reference to Africans, right? Or Asiatic people as well. All right, so now here we go. Let's find out who the Berbers were. As we begin to look at, as we begin to look at who these Berbers were, we go to United States report of the Immigration Commission, which is the Dictionary of Races. So we go to the definition of Berber, and we see that the Berber is the most important native race or people of Northwestern Africa. They're of Hamitic origin, right? And it says they number at least 7, and it mentioned here in parentheses, Caucasian, right? But it says they number at least 7 million in Morocco and Algeria and 500 in Tunis, Tripoli, not known as immigrants. So on one hand, they say here, the term Negro is confined to slave Africans, the ancient Berbers. It says that this is the most important native race or people of Northwestern Africa. Okay. Now, and it tells you to see Semitic, Hamitic, and Moor. So as we go to Moor, it says here that Moor is a historical rather than an ethnographical term applied to very different people in Northwest Africa, right? And it says, I'm going to skip down here, in Spanish history, as we were speaking about, the Moors and Moriscos were mainly Berbers rather than, as commonly supposed, Arabs. So it's saying that the Moors were mainly Berbers rather than as commonly supposed Arabs, because the term Moors also included people of Arab descent as well. Some dynasties, right? But it says it mainly was the Berbers. And so here we have states like South Carolina who adopted this Negro law, which was adopted by other states in the United States. And they are defining slave Africans as Berbers. So there are no Berbers who were not considered Moors. So this is right here is showing us that categorically, we are the descendants of these Moorish people. We see that we were marked for slavery from these particular papal bulls and the incentive that it created for the Portuguese to start a slave trade. When Columbus found the Americas with no Christians in it, he claimed it and was granted title by the Pope. Right. And so you have the Portuguese who didn't get a large portion of the New World action, but they were granted all of West Africa action. And they began the slave trade and transported the majority of the slaves, which were received at Brazil, as well as other ports in North America, right, to establish the slave trade. When we go find out who were those Africans they found, it's the same Africans they said they were going to get. It's the Berbers. But we see that the Berbers are Moors. And we see that they said they were going to get the Saracens. When we saw that those Saracens are Moabites and Agarenes, right? So, which are also Moors. So it's very important that we understand these connections, because this is the basis and the reason for the slave trade. Okay. Now, here is a where is it? Thought that slide came right after. It's still right here. All right. As we look at there's a source we have down right here in the bottom left corner from the American Jewish Historical Society. And it mentions the fact that there was an Inquisition, a law of the Spanish Inquisition in the Americas that came from Madrid, Spain in 1622. And it declared that none of the Spanish officers of the Inquisition, which are familiars, commissaries, or notaries, are to make a public note in the lineage of anybody, or to call them Jews or Moors or converts of Jews or Moors. So what we're seeing here is that it was law that you could not identify as a Moor. Not only were you enslaved, you were not allowed to identify as a Moor or a Jew by law. So those census that were going on at that period of time, you were not able to do what we are asking you to do now, to go back to your forefathers' ways. This is why we have lost knowledge of who we are, because it was systemic, right? There were laws in place that prohibited the notaries and the familiars from even documenting. You say you were Moor, they would write Negro, right? So this is the reason why, right, we've lost knowledge of this, right? All right, so now Moorish dominions. We talked about the Moors inhabiting and having dominion in the Americas prior to the earthquake. Well, let's go to the Congressional Globe when they're talking about the annexation of the state of Texas. As we know, Texas was a country already. It's the only state that was a country or a nation prior to joining the Union. All right. Well, this is a picture of the Alamo. See all the fezzes, the Moorish fezzes like I have on here in this picture, and it looks like a mosque in the back there. It's a picture of the Battle of the Alamo. So let's see. In this Congressional Globe, yeah, and this is from 1845, the Congressional Globe, the 28th Congress. They're speaking about Texas and annexing Texas. Now, I won't read all of this. I'll just get down to the meat of it. But they're basically giving, all the attributes of the land that Texas brings with it, right? And the land that's immediately next to the border between Texas and the United States, right? It says these territorial limits, right? Talking about the territorial limits. And it says those rivers are naturally our waters with their estuaries in the Bay of Mexico. The stupendous deserts between the Nueces and the Bravo rivers are the natural boundaries between the Anglo-Saxon and the Mauritanian races. We in America. And this is saying that the Nueces and the Bravo rivers are the natural boundaries between the Anglo-Saxon and the Mauritanian races. There ends the Valley of the West. There Mexico begins. Thence beyond the Bravo River begin the Moorish people and their Indian associates, to whom Mexico properly belongs, who should not cross that vast desert if they could, as on our side we ought too much stop there, because interminable conflicts must ensue, either of our going south or their coming north of that gigantic boundary. So this is in Congress. They're having open discussion about why they shouldn't bring Texas into the Union. And they're saying, man, that's Moorish land over there. We like oil and water. We don't mix. This particular individual was saying this is Moorish people, and Mexico properly belongs to the Moorish people and their Indian associates. Right. So yeah, this is from January 3rd, 1845. This is the exact same congressional globe. All right. So it's further building the understanding that Moorish history is world history. Right. Moorish history extends from Northeast and Southwest Africa all the way over to the Americas and before the earthquake. The archaeologists haven't gotten to a point where they have maybe they haven't dug that deep yet. But this information is coming forward. All right, here it is, an oration for the inhabitants of Boston in 1836, which was 9 years before that other congressional globe where they're talking about Texas. And here it's talking about with Texas and Mexico, we can have nothing in common. And with them, we ought to establish no relation except such an amicable one as the mutual advantage of each government demands. To suppose that the population of Mexico descended in part from the Saracens, see there that word is again. The Saracens were once marked for slavery and perpetual servitude through the doctrine of discovery, through the papal bulls, and that their lands were to be found wherever they may be, and their persons were to be reduced to perpetual slavery. So here it is. He's saying that population of Mexico descended in part from the Saracens. To suppose that a Moorish, Spanish, Mexican-American population, as has been well denominated in a speech of a representative of Massachusetts, which it is to be hoped everyone has read, to suppose that such a population as this will ever unite peaceably with us and become one of the states of the Union is visionary and absurd. Their language, their habits, their national character all forbid it. So it was common knowledge to everybody but us. And I'll be closing out here shortly, 5 minutes. So here is a map of the slave trade. Atlantic slave trade from the year 1731 to 1775. And we see that in West Africa, it shows the rates it shows the population of West Africans that were brought to the New World and where they brought them to. All right. Only 400,000 made it to mainland North America, where we're at now. Approximately 850,000 made it to the Brazils, because we know through the papal bulls that the Portuguese were given to West Africa to raid those coasts for slaves. And Spain was relegated to dealing with all the Americas. Right. And we know that the Portuguese only had that little piece of the Americas called Brazil. That's why the lion's share of the slaves went from West Africa to Brazil. All right. But what's important is in this map, this is just showing the population of slaves that were brought from West Africa from 1731 to 1775. OK, well, let's look at the treaties between Great Britain and Morocco during this very same time period. All right, the Treaty of Peace and Commerce between Britain and Morocco. Now, mind you, Britain is not engaging in the slave trade. This is the Portuguese. All right, between Great Britain and Morocco, signed the 23rd of January, 1721. So this is 10 years prior to the time period referenced on this map. The King of Fez, Mekanez, Morocco, and all the west of Africa. So the Sultan of the Moroccan Empire, Moulay Ali Sharif, is being recognized as the King of Fez, Mekanez, Morocco, and all the west of Africa. So that means if you came from these areas, you are in Moorish dominions, the same way that if you come from Georgia, Ohio, Florida, New York, you're an American. You're a US citizen. So in talking about where we going back to and why, this is why. Right, because we came from Moorish dominions, and the parent country of the United States, which is Britain, right, recognized that all the west of Africa was under the control, under the jurisdiction of the Sultan of Morocco. So that's why legally we are Moors. So we've touched on it from a standpoint of historically who was being dealt with, and now we've touched on it legally from treaties whose jurisdiction it is. And this is Moorish jurisdiction, the places in West Africa that they took us from. Now, look at the next treaty, 15th of December, 1734. The king, this is Muli Abdullah bin Ishmael, king and emperor of Fez, Meknès, Morocco, and all the west of Africa, right? 1734, still within this time period, right? 1750, right? Muli Abdullah bin Ishmael, king and emperor of Fez, Meknès, Morocco, and all the west of Africa, right? So all the west of Africa during these time periods was under Moorish jurisdiction. But notice something here. The United States, right, didn't get started until the United States of America didn't declare their independence until 1776. So this is prior to that, when they were colonists. All right. So this is important for us to understand in terms of us being correct in what we claim. We know that we can't go back to the tribe names because we don't have those. That's a level of detail that we may not be able to restore, but at least we can correct it from a general standpoint and something that's recognized by the government in which we live. All right. I won't get into the paper genocide where all the Negroes in Virginia all the Indians in Virginia were declared Negroes by what we call the one drop rule. All right, but you want to check that out. And that was established by Walter Plecker. And that one drop rule got adopted by various states throughout the country. Most people think that meant that, one drop you're black, and that was what it was for. Well, it was also to eliminate Indians in the state of Virginia. He declared that there was no more Indians who were not mixed with Negroes. And so he declared all the Indians in Virginia Negroes. All right. So now when we do claim our nationality, when we claim Moorish nationality, let's look at the distinction. All right. Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer before he was a president. And in 1855, which is approximately 13 years before the 14th Amendment, all right, Lincoln represented a Moor, all right, named William Dungy. And William Dungy was suing his brother-in-law because his brother-in-law, they both lived in Illinois. And at that time, Illinois did not allow any free persons of color to live in Illinois. If a free person of color was found in Illinois, all their property would be taken, their marriage would be annulled, they was not allowed to hold any office or vote, and they could not testify in court. No free persons of color. They weren't a slave state, but they didn't allow any free persons of color to live there either. Now, if black simply meant skin color, then why is this Moor living in Illinois at this time? Okay, so what happened, William Dungy had a dispute with his brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law turned around and started to spread rumor that he was a Negro, right? It's weird, but he started to spread a rumor that he was a Negro. Now, you would think that if he's got black skin, that would automatically mean he's a Negro. Well, when he started to spread this rumor, William Dungy springs into action, and he goes and he sues his brother for $1,000. In 1855, that was a lot of money. Sues him for $1,000 for slander. Okay, Lincoln represents William Dungy. He wins the case on the basis. Okay, and we'll quote Lincoln. He wins the basis on the closing argument that my client is not a Negro, though it is a crime to be a Negro, no crime to be born with a black skin. But my client is not a Negro. His skin may not be as white as ours, but I say he is not a Negro, though he may be a Moor. All right. So the judge thought he was talking about one of the other attorneys whose name was Moore with the E on the end. He said, "You mean Moore, not Moore?" And he says, "Well, yes, Your Honor, not C.H. Moore." And with a long sweep of his long arm toward the table where Moore and I sat, he said, "My client may be a Moor, but he's not a Negro." So this dispenses with the fact or with the myth that black has to do with skin color. Black has to do with a brand. All right. There's no people on the planet called black, except for the people who were put into slavery. So here we seeing here, this is no crime to be born with a black skin. So this brother must have been black, as we would say it, right? But he was a Moor and not a Negro. He won the case on that basis, and therefore he kept his property, he kept his marriage, and he kept his right to be a citizen of the state. All right. So this is the legal strength that comes along with our Moorish nationality. All right. So one last slide here. We're 2 minutes over. One last slide here is I want to show the in the state of South Carolina, sundry free Moors. So this is the here we go. So here we have the Journals of the House of Representatives of South Carolina from 1789 to 1790, right? And here we have on January 20th. All right, so this is the records of the House of Representatives in South Carolina in 1790. This is during the same time that Negro law was established that said that the Negroes are the ancient Berbers and their descendants. Okay, so that law said that we only captured Berbers, and we've already found that Berbers are Moors. So now here we have 5 Moors coming to petition the legislature of South Carolina, asking them that the Negro law not apply to them because they are Moors. Okay. It said that they were enslaved, but they had bought their freedom and they knew who they were. So they said, look, we are Moors. We're not Negroes. Well, the Spanish law of South Carolina says that if they captured Berbers, right, they could keep them. But they proclaimed their nationality here. So it says here, a petition was presented to the House by sundry free Moors, subjects of the Emperor of Morocco and residents in this state, praying that in the case they should commit any fault amenable to be brought to justice, that they, as subjects to a prince in alliance with the United States of America, can be tried under the same laws as citizens of this state would be liable to be tried, and not be tried under the Negro Act, which was received and read. Okay, so they go on to state that they were captured by one of the kings in Africa and sold to the European. Okay, so this is how they say that they were captured into slavery. They were at war and made prisoners of war by one of the kings in Africa. And then that king of Africa sold them to a European, Captain Clark. And he promised them that he would deliver them to the Moroccan ambassador in England, but instead he sold them into slavery in the United States. And since then, they have bought their freedom from their former master. And in particular, it says that they're asking the Honorable House that as freeborn subjects of a prince now in alliance with the United States, that they may not be considered as subject to a law of this state now in force, called the Negro law. But if they should unfortunately be guilty of any crime or misdemeanor against the laws of this land, that they may have a just trial by a lawful jury, and your petitioners, as in duty bound, will ever pray. So they're saying we don't want to have this Negro law applied to us. And if we do anything that's wrong, we just want the law of the land to apply to us. And I think that's what we all want right now. All right. So what happened? The Speaker of the House ordered it that it go to a committee. That committee went, deliberated, and said, okay, what's the status of these guys? Okay. So Mr. Edward Rutledge reported from the committee, all right, to whom was referred the petition of the free Moors, which he read in his place and afterwards to the clerk.
I don't mean to cut you off. Your screen is black.
Is it?
It's supposed to be black. No?
No. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here, just re-add it. I'm about to remove. Okay, there you go.
Oh, how long has it been black?
Not too long.
All right.
Since right after you said the last slide.
Okay, cool. All right, so here we go. Apologies for that. All right, so Mr. Rutledge came back from that committee and let me see. Okay, reported from the referred the petition of the free Moors. He read in his place, delivered it to the clerk's table where it was again read for information, and it was ordered that it be taken into immediate consideration, which being read through was agreed to and is as follows. Here's the report. They have considered the petition and are of opinion that no law of this state can in its construction or operation apply to them, and that persons who were subjects of the Emperor of Morocco being free in this state are not triable for the law by the law for the better ordering and governing of Negroes and other slaves. Resolved that this House do agree with the report. So by virtue of them proclaiming their nationality and also their connection, right, with the Sultan, they were able to spring free from any application of this Negro law. All right, so this is just yet another example of showing how nationality matters. All right, we know they've shown us that Black lives matter, but we've seen from Abraham Lincoln's own words that it's no crime to have black skin, although it's a crime to be a Negro. And we see that the definition for Negro, his status in disabilities, is the slave African. And we see that the term Black and African American are defined as not a people. Okay. And so now we have to be able to be astute in this. Sure, we might not like it, but we need the result to be correct. We understand that this is correct historically, legally. Now it's time for us to be smart and make a move on it. All right. So we're not saying that this is going to stop people automatically. They don't all of a sudden know that you're more. No, we're not saying that. We're not that naive. What we're saying is that we have to begin to use this as a means to begin a group think that's productive. When we know that we're descendants of Moors, we know the history of the Moors. We know the history of their accomplishments. We know what we can accomplish. As descendants of slaves, we know what we can accomplish. We know what we've got. But as descendants of Moors, as descendants of our ancestors, and we're not saying deny the rest of our ancestry because we're all mixed up. But what we're saying is we're identifying from a position of strength. All right. And so we're going to identify this way. We can move in unit, right? We can be insulated from these atrocities of the police because these legal aspects do apply. We're not saying that, hey, all of a sudden police are going to stop killing people. But if the law can now apply to you, that's something totally different as to when the law can arbitrarily be applied because of a ambiguous determination of your status. You see? So you can be customarily ruled upon when your status is ambiguous. Is he a legal person? Can I see him legally or not? Just like when the Europeans got here, there's no Christians here, there's no people here. I can't see you. Right? So we have to make them see us in the eyes of the law. And that has to come through your nationality. Nationality matters. Black lives don't matter because there's no people as black. It's no crime to have black skin, but it's a crime to be black, to continually use and cling to that name when it was given to you by slaves during the time of slavery. That era is out. It's time to bring back what is. All right. So that's kind of our position. That's what we're urging you. Anybody who needs assistance, we're here to help. Please subscribe to the page, share and like the video. And please forgive me for being long-winded, but this is something I feel like is vitally needed. If anybody felt that this was beneficial to you, we simply ask that you subscribe, like, and most importantly, donate and join the Moorish Science Temple of America, should you see fit. But otherwise, the recommendations are solid. All right. You can identify as Moorish. You don't have to join, but we ask that you at least come and lead with us and let's begin to vote together. Let's begin to politically aggregate. We have at least 10 locations nationwide with more coming. If there's no location in your area, reach out to us. We'll help and begin to help you establish one if that's something that you want to do. But we'll at least be able to help you and connect you with the closest location to you, either a conference call or what have you. With that, I'm going to say peace and love. And I'll turn it over to Sister Graelle for any closing comments.
No closing comments other than a well put together presentation. I get a little bit more out of it every time I see it. I'm glad it's a recording. I encourage anyone who can to go back, look at it again, reach out to us, just to have a conversation, politic, dialogue. Think about the things that truly matter in life and not the things that don't. Don't get caught up on the minutia and what's in the media. Choose what you digest in your body and mind carefully and go for the things that are a benefit to you. Peace and love.